Step away from the bag. Drop the tool now.
My suitcase. I'm tightening a wheel screw. Check my credentials.
Turn around. You're being detained for tampering.
Put hands on me without verifying ID, and you just bought yourself a federal lawsuit.
Officer Kyle Vance had been patrolling the concourses of Metro International Airport for 5 years when he made a decision that would implode his law enforcement career and cost the taxpayers of the city $6.5 million. He was 29 years old, possessed of a dangerous surplus of confidence, and operated under the firm belief that his instincts were sharper than the law itself. On a bright Tuesday morning, amidst the roar of jet engines and the squeak of luggage wheels, he received a radio dispatch from a baggage supervisor regarding a subject tampering with luggage in a quiet alcove of Terminal B. The subject was Federal Magistrate Judge Marcus Sterling, a 62-year-old jurist with 30 years of service on the bench who was simply trying to tighten a loose screw on his vintage leather suitcase. What Vance did next, ignoring the man's explanation, disregarding his federal credentials, and manhandling a senior officer of the court in front of travelers, would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias overrides logic. Before we unpack this disaster, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that experience and dignity should command respect, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We need to shine a light on these stories. Metro International Airport is a sprawling beast of glass and steel, a place of high stress and constant motion. At 10:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in May, the sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Terminal B, casting long shadows across the polished terrazzo floors. It is the kind of place where business travelers, tourists, and families collide in a frantic dance of departures and arrivals. The air smells of coffee floor wax and the faint, acrid scent of jet fuel. It is a place where security is paramount, but where common sense is often lost in the shuffle of TSA lines and boarding calls. Magistrate Judge Marcus Sterling had just flown in from a judicial conference in D.C. He was a man who commanded a room simply by standing in it. Standing 6'2" with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and a neatly trimmed gray beard, he wore a tailored navy suit that likely cost more than Officer Vance's car. Sterling was a man of precision. He had spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor before being appointed to the bench where he was known for his intellect, his fairness, and his absolute intolerance for foolishness. He had signed thousands of warrants, presided over countless arraignments, and sent hundreds of men to prison. He knew the Fourth Amendment better than he knew his own children's birthdays. That morning, Judge Sterling had retrieved his checked bag, a beautiful cognac-colored leather weekender he'd owned for 20 years, only to find that the handling process had been unkind. One of the brass wheels was wobbling dangerously. Being a practical man who disliked waste, Sterling didn't look for a trash can. He looked for a solution. He stepped away from the crowded carousel, finding a quiet spot near a pillar by the oversized baggage claim. He set the bag on a bench, produced a small spectacle repair kit from his briefcase, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $5, and took out a screwdriver no longer than his pinky finger. He put on his reading glasses and bent down to tighten the screw. He was bothering no one. He was impeding no traffic. He was a traveler fixing his own property. But to one set of eyes watching from the service corridor, Marcus Sterling was not a judge performing a repair. He was a threat. Derek Sneed was the shift supervisor for the baggage handling service. At 34 years old, Sneed was a man who constantly felt the world wasn't giving him the respect he deserved. He spent his days barking orders at junior handlers and patrolling the claim area, looking for reasons to exert his limited authority. Sneed considered himself the first line of defense against theft, though he mostly just hassled confused tourists. From his vantage point about 50 feet away, Sneed saw a tall black man in a suit crouching over a piece of expensive luggage, using a tool to pry at the hardware. In Sneed's mind, the narrative wrote itself instantly. The suit was a disguise. The tool was a lockpick. The man was obviously trying to break into the bag or strip it for parts. It didn't matter that the bag clearly matched the briefcase the man was carrying. It didn't matter that the man was moving with the slow, deliberate calm of an owner, not the frantic haste of a thief. Sneed saw what he expected to see. He didn't approach the man. He didn't ask, "Excuse me, sir, is that your bag?" Instead, Sneed pulled out his radio, switching to the direct line for airport police. "Dispatch, this is baggage lead Sneed. I've got a 1031 in progress at Carousel 4. Black male 60s tampering with high-end luggage. He's got tools. He's trying to dismantle a bag right now. Send a unit fast." The dispatch went out. Unit 4 Alpha respond to Terminal B, Carousel 4. Report of a theft in progress. Suspect is a black male tampering with luggage using tools. Officer Kyle Vance was sitting in his cruiser parked at the curb when the call came in. "Show me en route," he said, flipping on his emergency lights to cut through the taxi lane traffic. Vance was a man who believed in aggressive policing. His personnel file was a thick stack of mixed reviews, high marks for arrests, but failing grades for community relations. He had 6 citizen complaints in 5 years, mostly for rudeness or escalating minor infractions into major confrontations. He called it proactive policing. His supervisors called it a liability, but the union kept him on the job. Vance parked the cruiser and jogged through the automatic doors, his hand resting on his utility belt. He wasn't entering the terminal to investigate. He was entering to apprehend. The dispatcher had said, "Theft in progress." And Vance treated that information as gospel truth, not as an unverified report from a baggage handler. As he moved through the crowd, he scanned the area, his adrenaline spiking. He wanted a good bust. He wanted to be the hero who stopped a theft ring. He spotted Sterling near the pillar. The description matched perfectly. Tall, black male suit messing with a bag. Vance didn't see a federal judge. He didn't see a distinguished gentleman. He saw a perpetrator. He saw a target. Vance slowed his pace as he approached, but he didn't soften his posture. He squared his shoulders, puffed out his chest, and walked directly toward the bench where Sterling was just finishing the repair. The judge was tightening the final turn of the screw, satisfied that the wheel was secure. He hadn't noticed the officer yet. He was focused on the task at hand. "Hey!" Vance barked, his voice booming over the ambient noise of the terminal. "Step away from the bag now." Judge Sterling paused. He didn't jump. He didn't drop the tool. He simply stopped turning. The screw took a breath and slowly stood up, turning to face the voice. He looked over the top of his reading glasses, his expression one of mild annoyance rather than fear. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that had silenced unruly defense attorneys for decades. "I said step away from the bag," Vance repeated, stepping into Sterling's personal space, his hand hovering near his taser. "Put the tool down. Hands where I can see them." Sterling looked at the young officer. He saw the tension in the man's jaw, the dilated pupils, the aggressive stance. He recognized the signs of a poorly trained officer who was already committed to a course of action. "Officer," Sterling said calmly, removing his reading glasses and folding them into his breast pocket. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. This is my luggage. I am simply tightening a loose wheel screw before I head to my car." "Yeah, right," Vance sneered. "And I'm the mayor. I got a report of you prying this bag open. You're holding a weapon. Drop it." "A weapon?" Sterling looked at the tiny screwdriver no bigger than a toothpick held between his thumb and forefinger. "This is an eyeglass screwdriver. It is hardly a weapon, and I am not prying anything. I am repairing my own property." "I'm not going to ask you again," Vance shouted, causing travelers nearby to stop and stare. "Drop the tool or you're getting tased." Sterling carefully placed the tiny screwdriver on the bench next to the suitcase. He raised his empty hands to chest height, palms open. "The tool is down, officer. I am complying, but I am telling you, you are making a significant error in judgment." "Turn around," Vance commanded. "Hands on your head." "Officer," Sterling said, planting his feet. "I am Federal Magistrate Judge Marcus Sterling. My credentials are in my breast pocket. I am asking you to check them before you escalate this any further. I don't care who you say you are. Vance snapped. "I caught you breaking into Luggage. You can tell your story downtown. Turn around." This is the moment where training is supposed to kick in. This is where an officer is supposed to pause, assess, and listen. A man in a $3,000 suit claiming to be a federal judge calmly repairing a bag that matches his briefcase. Reasonable suspicion should have evaporated. But Vance wasn't operating on reason. He was operating on bias. He heard judge and thought liar. He saw a black man with a tool and thought criminal. "I am not turning around." Sterling set his voice hardening into the tone he used when holding a lawyer in contempt. "I have committed no crime. I have identified myself. I am authorizing you to reach into my pocket and retrieve my identification. If you put your hands on me without cause, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights and opening yourself and this department to liability." Vance didn't like being lectured. He stepped forward, grabbed Sterling's wrist, and wrenched his arm behind his back. The judge let out a sharp intake of breath as his shoulder joint was twisted, but he didn't fight back. He knew better. Resistance would only give them a justification for violence. "Stop resisting!" Vance yelled for the benefit of the onlookers, though Sterling was standing perfectly still. "I am not resisting," Sterling said loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I am complying under protest. I am a federal magistrate. Witnesses, please record this." Vance kicked Sterling's legs apart and slammed the handcuffs onto his wrists. He ratcheted them too tight. "You're under arrest for attempted theft, possession of burglary tools, and resisting arrest." "Burglary tools," Sterling repeated, shaking his head slightly. "For an eyeglass screwdriver. Officer, I strongly suggest you call your supervisor immediately." "You'll see a supervisor when we get to the station," Vance said, grabbing the judge by the upper arm and shoving him forward. "Move." The scene was now attracting a significant crowd. Dozens of phones were raised. People were whispering, pointing. "That's a judge," someone asked. "He looks like a businessman." Vance didn't care. He felt powerful. He had his suspect. He left the stolen bag and the burglary tool on the bench, instructing a passing TSA agent to watch that evidence. He marched Judge Sterling through the terminal, parading him past the very people Sterling had spent a lifetime serving. For Sterling, the walk was a surreal nightmare. He had spent 30 years ensuring that the law was applied fairly. He had released defendants when the police lacked probable cause. He had signed search warrants only when the evidence was rock solid. Now he was being treated like a common criminal because a baggage handler and a cowboy cop couldn't see past the color of his skin. But as they walked, Sterling's mind was working. He was memorizing the officer's name tag, K. Vance. He was noting the time, 10:28 a.m. He was cataloging the procedural errors. Failure to investigate. Failure to verify ID excessive force. False arrest. They exited the terminal into the bright sunlight. Vance shoved Sterling into the back of the cramped patrol car. The judge had to twist his body to fit his long legs inside the handcuffs, biting into his wrists. "Comfortable?" Vance asked from the front seat, adjusting his rearview mirror to smirk at his prisoner. "Officer Vance," Sterling said, his voice calm and icy. "You have just arrested a federal magistrate. You refuse to verify my credentials. You are transporting me without probable cause. I want you to remember this moment because it is the last time you will ever make an arrest." Vance laughed. "Yeah, sure, buddy. You guys always say you know people. Tell it to the sergeant." The drive to the airport police substation took 5 minutes. Vance spent it radioing ahead, bragging about the high-value target he had in custody. Sterling sat in silence, closing his eyes, composing the legal brief in his head. He wasn't just a victim. He was the evidence. When they arrived at the station, Vance pulled Sterling out of the car and walked him into the processing area. The station was a small drab building with fluorescent lights and linoleum floors. Sitting behind the high desk was Sergeant Miller. Miller was 55 years old, a veteran of the force who had seen it all. He was tired. He was 2 years away from retirement and just wanted a quiet shift. He looked up as Vance dragged Sterling in. Miller's eyes went from Vance's smug face to the man in the handcuffs. He took in the suit, the shoes, the bearing, and then he looked at the face. Miller frowned. He felt a prickle of recognition. "What do we have here, Vance?" Miller asked, standing up slowly. "Caught him in Terminal B," Vance said proudly. "Breaking into luggage, had a lockpick, tried to talk his way out of it, claimed he was some kind of judge, resisted arrest." Miller looked at Sterling. "Resisted?" "I did not resist," Sterling said. "And I am not some kind of judge. I am United States Magistrate Judge Marcus Sterling. My credentials are in my left breast pocket where I told this officer they were 10 minutes ago." The room went dead silent. Miller looked at Vance. "Did you check his ID?" "He was pulling for a weapon, Sarge. I didn't have time to check his fake ID." Miller walked around the desk. He approached Sterling. "Sir, may I—" "Please," Sterling said. Miller reached into the pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open. There unmistakably was the gold badge of the United States Courts and the federal identification card. Miller stared at it. He looked at the photo. He looked at Sterling. He looked at the expiry date. It was real. He felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the handcuffs on the judge's wrists. "Vance," Miller whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. "Give me the keys." "Sarge, those are probably fake. You know how these guys—" "Give me the keys," Miller roared, slamming his hand on the counter. Vance jumped, startled. He fumbled for his keys and handed them over. Miller unlocked the cuffs with shaking hands. "Judge Sterling," Miller said. I don't know what to say. I apologize. This is a catastrophic mistake." Sterling rubbed his wrists. There were deep red indentations where the metal had cut in. He looked at Miller, then he turned his gaze to Vance. Vance was looking at the badge on the counter, his mouth slightly open. The realization was starting to creep in. "It is not a mistake, Sergeant," Sterling said, adjusting his cuffs. "A mistake is a typo. A mistake is a wrong turn. This was a willful violation of my civil rights based on racial profiling. This officer refused to listen. He refused to verify. He assumed." Sterling reached for his wallet and put it back in his pocket. "I need a phone. I need to call the chief judge of the district court, and then I need to call the United States Marshal Service." Miller nodded, pale as a ghost. "Yes, Your Honor. Right here. Use my line." Vance stood there frozen. "But the baggage guy said—" "Shut up, Vance," Miller snapped. "Go into the break room and sit down. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit there and pray." The next hour was a blur of activity that the airport police station had never seen before. 2 black SUVs pulled up within 20 minutes. U.S. Marshals in tactical gear entered the building. The airport police chief arrived tucking his shirt in, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. Judge Sterling sat in the sergeant's office holding an ice pack to his wrist, giving a statement to a lieutenant. He was calm, precise, and absolutely devastating in his recollection of the facts. By noon, Officer Kyle Vance had been stripped of his badge and gun. He was placed on immediate administrative leave. He walked out of the station not as a hero, but as a pariah. The fallout was nuclear. The video of the arrest hit the internet by 2:00 p.m. It showed everything Sterling had said was true. The calm demeanor, the explanation, the aggression from Vance, the perp walk. The baggage supervisor, Derek Sneed, was fired before the end of the day. His call to dispatch was pulled. Blackmail, tampering. The bias was undeniable. Judge Sterling filed a civil rights lawsuit against the city, the airport authority officer Vance, and Derek Sneed. The suit didn't just ask for damages, it demanded structural change. It alleged a pattern and practice of discriminatory policing at the airport. The city attorneys took one look at the video, one look at the judge's credentials, and one look at the police report Vance had started to write, and they folded. There was no defense. You cannot defend the indefensible. The settlement was reached in record time, $6.5 million. But Sterling didn't keep it all. He established a legal defense fund for travelers who had been wrongfully detained. Kyle Vance was fired. The review board found that he had violated 14 separate department policies. His certification was revoked by the state. He would never carry a badge again. At 29, he had to start over forever, known as the cop who arrested a federal judge for fixing his own luggage. The airport police department was forced into a federal consent decree. They had to overhaul their training specifically regarding bias and escalation. Every officer now has to undergo mandatory simulation training on interacting with the public, but the money and the firings don't erase the memory. Judge Sterling still travels, but he never checks a bag anymore. He carries everything on. And every time he sees a police officer in an airport, he feels that same tightness in his chest, that reminder that no matter how high you rise, no matter how many years you serve to some people, you are just a suspect waiting to be caught. It is a harsh reality that dignity is often fragile when placed in the hands of the ignorant. Officer Vance thought he was protecting the airport. Instead, he proved that the greatest threat to justice is often the person wearing the badge who refuses to see the humanity in front of him. What do you folks think? Should police officers be personally liable for civil rights violations like this? Should they have to pay out of their own pensions? It's a question we need to ask. Drop a comment below. If you think this story was worth your time, please like and subscribe. We have to keep telling the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Stay safe out there and watch your bags.